Welcome to the Australian Business Show, the ultimate destination for entrepreneurs and business leaders who are ready to make waves in today's dynamic marketplace. Whether you're scaling a startup or leading a major enterprise, the keys to success are right here. We bring you insider access to the minds of the world's top business trailblazers, uncovering strategies, insights, and innovations that are shaping the future of commerce. Tune in, take notes, and get ready to elevate your game. Now let's dive in.
Finally, we made it to get on. How are you?
I'm great. How are you doing today?
Yeah, fabulous. Thank you. It's nice to be able to catch up with you. And we were on the Australian Business Show here, and a lot of people in Australia may or may not know who Hugh Hilton is. I assume you get this a lot too, where they mistakenly ask you the question. So,
Sure.
so you're part of the Hilton Empire, and you are, but not as they know it, right?
Exactly right, Nick. That's although I've had some interesting encounters with that. I ran a big casino that used to be owned by the Hilton chain, and Barron had a big ranch outside of this casino up in Reno. But he sold his whole chain, so he's no longer involved in it. But when I was running over my daily ops, I looked and I checked, and my kitchen staff was like at half staff, and there was some inventory that was checked out. And I said, "What's going on here?" And they said, "Oh, Barron's in town," and so a number of the staff are up at the ranch cooking the meals for the family. I said, "Wait a minute." I said, "They don't own this anymore." So I said, "So the fact that we're providing free labor and food for them, that's inappropriate." So I said, "Send him a bill." So we sent him a bill. Oh, you would have thought I broke into his house and stole all his valuable possessions. He was so upset. So I said, "Okay, fine." So I call him up. I call the office, and they answer the phone. I said, "Yes, I'd like to speak to Barron." They said, "Who is this?" I said, "This is Hugh Hilton calling." And there was like dead silence on the phone. Like, wait a minute, which part of the family is this guy from? We've never heard this guy's name. So that was pretty funny.
But look, you have done literally billions of dollars in deals, though.
Yeah.
Incredibly well credentialed, incredibly well experienced, and I've personally heard you speak at different events. I want to talk a little bit about. Obviously, I'm talking to an Australian audience predominantly here. Have you spent much time in Australia before?
I have not. I really haven't. That would be one thing I hope I have an opportunity to do in this lifetime. But so far, it hasn't presented itself.
Yeah, look, I'm sure as busy as you are, it's high on the list there when you do get a chance. It's obviously well worth it. But I know from personal experience, the opportunity to sort of in America alone has so much to offer. But it's somewhat of a unique place out here. Look, economic conditions at the moment are interesting to say the least. There's a lot going on there, and it's certainly impacting business here in a significant way. I'm
Yep.
personally working on some roll-ups and learning a lot from JT through that whole experience
Good.
as well.
Great.
We just settled
Great.
our first acquisition as a bolt-on to our platform company there. But
Mhm.
what I've noticed recently is it's a hot topic. Mergers and everybody's kind of talking about mergers and acquisitions and roll-ups. And I've had this conversation a few times with people. I go, what is driving that? And one response somebody said to me was, well, it's because people have realized it's a faster, better way to be able to grow and scale. I said, yeah, but it always was. That's
Mhm.
not you. So
Mhm.
in your experience, in your opinion, what's driving that at the moment? It's like the latest thing in business.
Well, I think there's some validity to what you just said. If you can do an add-on, then it's better than starting from zero. Also, there's a economy of scale in terms of when you buy an add-on, you basically are able to reduce the overall operating expenses because you already have your core platform on finance and operations. So you're able to keep a bigger chunk of the revenue because you're going to scale or reduce the headcount of the administrative function of the acquired company, and you're going to use your own kind of platform to just add another revenue component without the proportional amount of expenses that go along with that, because you can leverage your own cost centers and things like that. What happens is, from our perspective, what we do is we come in and then we optimize the operations. So we have a whole function at Alvarez and Marcel that does called Transaction Advisory Group, TAG, that'll look at how you can integrate it into the company. And then we have another group called Private Equity Profit Improvement. So then we come in and then optimize all aspects of the business. So I think people are trying to, in particularly in this environment, they're trying to add some different things too, because they're able to purchase things at a lower multiple than historically they've been able to purchase because of the somewhat tepid environment. So they're saying, hey, if I can get a company at a pretty decent environment and then the economy swings back, then I'm going to be able to exit at a higher multiple than what I bought the company at.
Yeah. But why is it now all of a sudden the latest thing? It's just everybody I speak to in business, in different networks, is talking about this. It wasn't the case a couple of years ago. What's shifted there?
Well, I think what happens is, if you've got a platform that's well capitalized, it's easier to get a deal done with someone who is trying to sell his company that somebody's going to have to go out and get third-party debt to acquire it. So they're able to get a better price by selling it to an existing platform that's got a pretty strong balance sheet, so they can get better attractive financing and be able to pay a little bit more for the company than if they tried to sell it as a standalone company.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. And I think we've gotten more creative with the way that we can structure to fund some of these deals, which has opened up access to that, I think. So yeah, it's a great point. Some of the markets, tell us a little bit about some of the different markets you've done. Obviously a huge amount in real estate. I know you've done a lot in hospitality and food as well. So do you find there's commonality in the way that you structure and negotiate those deals across different markets, or are there differences?
There are differences in terms of basic multiples, vary by industry. But what a lot of the things that I was involved in were distressed. And so I had to come in and figure out what the distress was and then optimize the operations. And what was fascinating to me is that there are probably, of the 28 restructures I was involved in, I would say probably 2/3 of them, I would say close, were all disparate industries. So, I mean, it's not something like I knew what they did, and I just had to figure out really quickly what they did and how to do it more efficiently. And what I discovered is that to a large extent, there's not a lot of curiosity and creativity in these companies. The people running them aren't all that curious and creative. And so by looking at things differently, I was able to turn around a lot of companies, and the solutions that I came up with, nobody in the existing management platform even conceived, and that was just by being curious and asking some questions. And what I found is there's obviously some very successful companies, and those leaders generally have these two components of creativity and curiosity that most people don't. And that's pretty innate. I mean, if you're right-handed, you're very analytical and process driven. And if you're left-handed, you're more curious and creative. So, if you're right-handed, you're not likely going to be as curious or creative as a left-handed person.
Is that a fact?
Oh, absolutely. It is the way your brain is set up. And what I look back at mine, Nick, or a lot of my success was the result of, I was born left-handed, and then I was turned into a right-handed person, because back when I was young, if you were left-handed, you're considered to be part of the devil. So what I didn't fully appreciate, because I didn't know that I was converted until I was probably like 40 or 45, and I just finally called my mother up one day and I said, "Hey, was I born left-handed?" Like dead silence on the phone. I said, "Hello?" And she goes, "Yeah." I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, what the hell happened?" She goes, "Oh, you don't understand, blah, blah, blah. When you're young, if you're considered part of the devil, if you're left-handed, so we had to convert you to a right-handed person." And it was fascinating because I noticed there were things that were different about me when I was growing up. Like I was a competitive swimmer and I breathed out of my left side like this, doing the freestyle. And then when I played pool, I used my left hand to hold the pool stick to shoot. And I always put my wallet in my back left pocket. And so I was watching people and I noticed like right-handed people usually put their wallet in their back right pocket. And all these things are a little odd, but I never put it all together that, oh, I was born left-handed, so innately I'm left-handed. But then when I would come up with these solutions to fix these companies, and I'd think about it, I'd go like, wow, how did I come up with that creative solution? And so I realized that a large part of it was attributed to the fact that when I would come into a situation, I'd be very curious and I'd ask a lot of questions and find out a lot of really interesting information that most left brain or right-handed people just wouldn't think of. And the best example is when I was hired as the CEO of a $1.2 billion revenue mass merchant firm. And when I got there, the first day on the job, the bank cut off all credit to the company. So here I got like 3,500 employees and I've got no money. So I'm thinking like, well, how do I fix this when I have no availability to any cash because the bank cut off all credit to the company? So I'm in the store when I got the phone call and I'm with my director of store ops, the store manager, and my chief merchant. And this person is checking out of the checkout. We're standing down by the register, and this bottle of water rolls through the scanner. And I said to my head of store ops, I said, "See that bottle of water?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "How long does it take you to get that back in the store?" Now, I can tell you, most right-handed people, when they got that call from the bank, wouldn't ask a question like that. And I think back on it, Nick, I go like, I don't know why I asked it either. You know,
No.
it just came out. I mean, it's just kind of the way my brain works. And I go like, well, it goes to our 1.5 million square foot distribution center, sits in a queue for 10 days. It picked on day 11. It's back in the store day 12. I said, "And how do you pay for that?" And he said, "Well, we pay COD." So I said to the store manager, "Well, how many bottles of water, how many days supply do you carry in the store?" He goes, "We don't trust the distribution center, so we carry at least 20 days of stock." And we're like, huh. So I said to the head of store ops, I said, "How about this? How about we sell that bottle of water and we get it back in the store the next day?" He looks at me, "Can't be done. Nobody does it that way. Impossible. What do you know? You've only been here for 3 days." I said, "Well, that was a nice comment to say to the new CEO." But I said, but I learned when dealing with right-handed people, because they're routine driven, they're not comfortable with change. So they're innately not going to keep looking for different ways of doing things because that makes them feel uncomfortable. So I looked at it and I said, well, you're kind of doing that way. You're kind of doing it already. You're just waiting 10 days to do it. Yeah, 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 we know, but nobody does it the way you're talking about. I said, so instead of arguing with them, because I knew they were resistant to change, I used the first C of the 6 Cs, which is what I developed to do all this stuff. And I said, "You're right. What do I know?" So the guy looked at me. I said, "I've only been here 3 days." I said, "But here's one thing I do know." They go, "What's that?" I said, "I just got a call from the bank. The bank's cut off all credit to our company. So we can continue doing it the way you're doing it. In 30 days, none of us will have a job. Or we can do this thing that you say can't be done, but if somehow we are able to do it, then we'll all have a job. So you choose." And then they go, "Well, if you put it that way, which is exactly the way you always hear from somebody who doesn't want to do something." I said, "No, no, no." I said, "No, listen, I'm happy. If you want to keep doing it your way, that's fine. I'll have another job. Don't worry about it." It was so fine. He goes, "Fine, okay, we'll do it that way." And I said, "Well, great. And I don't want to pay COD anymore. I want to pay 210 net 30. And we're going to do it for everything, not just the water. Everything we sell, we're going to sell it and get it back in the store the next day." In 45 days, I paid off $65 million in bank debt. We had no bank debt. And people just like you would shake their head like, "Where did you come up with that?"
Yeah.
So and it's just the way my brain works. And when I go into situations, I look at it, and like when I ran the big casino up in Reno, we had a buffet, and the buffet was losing money. So I went to the head of my food and beverage operation. I said, "Did you have anybody look at this?" And they said, "Oh yeah, we brought in an expert." I said, "Really? What did he tell you to do?" He said, "Close it down for 4 days a week, only have it open for 3 days." I said, "And did you pay for that?" And he goes, "Yeah, why?" I said, "That's what I call an elevator analysis." And he goes, "What's that?" I said, "The elevator goes up, the elevator goes down. Tell me something I don't already know." I said, "That's not a solution. That's the biggest bunch of bullshit I've ever heard in my life. We got to fix this, not just shut it down." So I said, "Get the head of our gaming operations in a meeting. I want to sit down with you guys in 45 minutes." So we sit down. I got my head of food and beverage, my head of gaming, and I said to the head of gaming, we were charging $18 for the buffet. So I said, "What do you think a compelling price point would be for our buffet?" And he said $7.77, like, triple sevens on a slot machine. So I said to my head of food and beverage, "What do you think about it?" He goes, "No friggin' way. My food cost is $8.50. I'd never agree to something like that." So now what would a normal person? Well, I guess, I don't know, maybe there's nothing to do here. Instead, I went to the head of food and beverage. I said, "How about this? How about to get that $7.77 rate, you got to join your players club, which gives you more players club members, which increases your revenue. And in exchange, you should be willing to pay the head of food and beverage a $2 bounty for everybody that signs up for to be a new member of the players club." I said, "What about that?" He goes, "Yeah, I'd do that." Then I turned around to the head of food and beverage and I said, "So now what?" I said, "Now you're getting paid $9.77. So you should be willing to do it." He goes, "Okay, fine, I'll do it." I said, "Okay, let's roll it out." So we roll it out. We have 2.5 to 3 hour waits every night to get into the buffet. So we're doing 6,000 covers a month before we fixed it. Take a guess what our covers were after that, after we rolled it out.
After the last example you gave me, I'm not even going to try paying off $69 million in 45 days.
All right. 42,500. It went from 6,000 to 42,500. We had 3 hour waits. So what did I do then? I said, well, I'm not going to have these people wait. I'm going to have them sign in. I'm going to give them a pager. And I'm going to give them $20 of free play, because I know every dollar free play I gave them, I got $4 net profit out of them. So while they were waiting to save $10 on the buffet, I was making $80 off of them on the floor, because they were losing all the money, because that's the way a casino works, right?
I think that works.
So long story, the epilogue to that and some other changes I made in operations, we were the only casino in the entire state of Nevada that had positive gaming comps in 2009. Not one other casino in the entire state of Nevada had positive gaming comps. That was in the Great Recession. So
Amazing.
once I had this organized, I said to my head of food and beverage, "Are you ready to have fun now?" And he goes, "What do you mean fun now?" I said, "Oh, just getting him here, that's just the beginning. Now we're going to make it really profitable too." And he goes, "Well, what are you talking about?" I said, "See this guy?" I pointed to this guy in line that was probably weighing about 320 pounds. I said, "What do you think that guy's thinking?" And, typical right-handed person, the response was, "How would I know what he's thinking?" So left-handed response, like me, I said, "I'll tell you what he's thinking. He's thinking, I can hardly wait to get into that buffet for $7.77. I'm going to eat these guys out of house and home." I said, "And you know what our response is to that?" He goes, "No, what?" I said, "No friggin' way." So he goes, "Well, how are we going to do that?" And I said, "Okay, well, let's start with the most expensive item on a buffet." I go, "What's that?" He goes, "Well, it's the crab legs." I said, "Of course." And I said, "And what's the spec on the crab legs?" He said, "Well, they're double scored, which means they're pre-cracked." I said, "Exactly. So you can get into them really fast and easily, and you can eat a lot of them." So I said, for $7.77, that guy's going to have to work his ass off to get in that crab leg. So next week, they're all non-scored. He goes, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "Well, what I mean is we're going to slow that guy down. So finally, the rest of his family is going to say, I'm not going to sit here all night and watch you try to get in those crab legs. So, better finish those up and we're done." And he goes, "Oh, really?" And I said, for $7.77, we're not deveining and taking the crust off the shrimp. They're going to have to do that themselves and peel the shrimp themselves. And I said, and now for the coup de grace. He goes, what's that? We were the largest consumer of prime rib in all of Nevada. So I said, next week, I want you to buy all our prime rib out of Las Vegas. He goes, okay. So we order it, and I knew what was going to happen. So I said, call a meeting with our meat vendor. So the guy comes in, I have my head of food and beverage. He sits down. I said, Bob, how you doing? He goes, awful. And I said, really, Bob, what could be causing that? He goes, you know. I said, well, know what, Bob? You bought all your meat out of Vegas. I'm sitting on a pile of prime rib that I have no way of selling out of. He goes, so I'm screwed. I said, wow, that must be a terrible feeling, Bob. I said, you know, if you were our partner, that wouldn't happen. He goes, what do you mean, partner? I said, well, I mean, partner means we buy our prime rib from you. He goes, oh, I like that. I said, so you're a partner now, Bob? He goes, yeah, I'm a partner. I said, good. Now that you're a partner, I want you to tell my head of food and beverage how you can sell us non-graded beef that tastes just the same as prime rib at 30% less. All the blood goes out of his face. He goes, how did you know about that? I said, Bob, because I run restaurants. I said, I know how you do that. You take a natural enzyme, you inject the enzyme into the ungraded meat, and it tastes just like prime rib. He goes, oh, Jesus. I said, don't worry. If anybody has any questions, we'll roll out prime rib again. No one ever knew the difference between prime rib and the ungraded meat that was naturally tenderized. And then everybody started getting excited about what we were doing. So when I went down there, none of the waitresses were making any money. Now they're all making a ton of money because so many people were coming through, and we'd have meetings and talk about it. And I'd come down and they'd go, oh, Mr. Hilton, you're going to love this. And I'd go like, tell me. And they go like, well, here's what we did. We went out and got 32-ounce glasses, and then we would give them a bunch of bread, and they'd eat the bread and drink the soda, and their stomach would expand. They could eat nothing. So I go, that's perfect. I love that. And so everybody went from being miserable to having fun. And it just worked out great.
I could listen to you all day. So I want to unpack that a little bit and as quickly as we can here,
Sure.
but some of the learning lessons, because you talk about your 6 Cs, and I know curiosity, you spoke about that. So if somebody as a left-hander has a natural ability, and I guess there's varying degrees, it's probably a spectrum, yeah. How does somebody then learn to build that muscle if they're not a left-hander?
Okay, by reading and embracing a concept that I'm going to expand my knowledge of things. And so I read, and I've suggested a couple books to read in my speeches. And once you're consciously aware of it, you have the ability to overcome it by reading and learning. So using that to be curious about things and reading about it, and that's what I would do.
Yeah.
And understanding when you're sitting down and looking at things to consciously say, hey, I've got to look at this differently than I would traditionally look at it. And I mean, there were so many situations that I would come up with. And for example, when I ran a restaurant chain, no one would ask any of the field people what was going on. Corporate would just tell them what to do, and they were fine with that. But what I did is I called them all into corporate, and I started asking a bunch of questions about the food, the serving, and this, that, and the other thing. For example, I asked a question about, okay, tell me about what you did with your last 2 menu changes. What were the menu changes and what were the results? So they told me, and I got the results. They said, yeah, every time you changed the menu, sales went down. They didn't go up. And they kind of looked at me. I said, so that isn't clearly a good strategy of taking what I would call a Mexican comfort food strategy and turning it into a traditional Mexican food strategy. So then I would ask another question. I said, what was the #1 selling SKU? They said, well, it's chicken quesadilla. And I said, well, what's the ingredients of that? So they gave me the ingredients, and I grew up in the Midwest, and I said, oh yeah, that's chicken a la king. Yeah, we love that. So no wonder it was the #1 selling SKU, but it's not traditional Mexican at all.
Mexican.
So I said, growing up in the Midwest, we like drinking tequila and having all those types of things, but we don't eat Mexican food. So what did I do? I pivoted right back to just the friendly food, but with Mexicans named. Sales went up immediately. The chicken quesadilla went to the #1 selling SKU within 7 days. So it's just asking and being curious, and you get there. You really do, Nick. It's just
Yeah.
most people just don't, they're just not curious enough.
It's like the philosophy of the five whys, right? Just keep asking questions, develop that
Exactly.
curiosity. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And also encourage people to participate. Like when I ran the big casino, what I did is I incented people to come to me with operating expense efficiencies by giving them 20% of the first year's savings of any operating efficiency ideas they had. Because I had a 3 million square foot platform. I couldn't be everywhere over 3 million square feet and understand all the possible savings and operating savings. So I incented them. They said, "You mean what happens if I came to you and said it would save you, $200,000 a year? You'd pay me $40,000?" And I said, "Yes." And they just went like, "Whoa!" And so I got a lot of operating efficiencies much more quickly than I could have just asking all these people, because I had thousands of employees. So
Yeah.
leveraging something to align each other's priorities is a really good way of doing that.
Yeah, brilliant. All right. Just quick fire questions here on you. Unscripted, unplanned, or business sellers. What's one mistake sellers always make?
Um, that's a great question. I think one thing is they might overestimate or exaggerate what their revenue or potential is, or not focus enough on their expenses, and not really incent. The third thing probably would be not properly incent their team to align each other's strategies and benefits to optimize the exit price.
Yeah, I like that. Most overrated metric in business valuation?
Um, Adjusted EBITDA. So because you'll find when you ask what the adjustments are, you'll go like, wait a minute. No,
Yeah.
I'm not paying you on adjusted EBITDA. I'm paying you on actual EBITDA.
Most underrated strategic lever in a turnaround?
Uh, that's easy. That's employee buy-in to get
Yeah.
everybody on the same page.
And finally, one phrase you use in deal negotiation that closes more than anything else?
I always, one of the things that's fascinating, it's a great question because this has come up a lot lately, is um, saying, I'd like to structure this as a win-win rather than a win-lose. I said, and it's really worked well. I give one example where I was trying to buy a building from a credit union, and I did not have the highest offer, but most people just submitted their offer. I actually asked to meet with the CFO so I could present my offer, and we sat down and I said, "Listen, I don't have the highest offer, and I know you think I'm probably just going to try to, bamboozle you." I said, "But I don't think the other two higher offers are going to close." I said, and here's what I'm prepared to do just to demonstrate my sincerity in that. I said, "I'm willing to agree to a price that once I fix this building and turn it around and I generate an IRR, that anything above our agreed upon IRR, I'll give you 50% of the profits above that." And the CFO, like, "I've never heard an offer like that. Why would you agree to do that?" I said, "Because I really want to do something that's fair, and I'm not trying to hoodwink you, and I'm not trying to retrade the deal at the end." So he said, "Well, that's amazing. I need to go talk to my board about that." So he called me back and he said, "We've had our board meeting and we're going to select you as the buyer." And the board was equally as amazed because they've never heard somebody offer something like that. And that level of integrity made us choose you over the other buyers. And we're not going to charge you the profit participation
Yeah.
because we're just so amazed.
Yeah, yeah. Integrity is such a critical element to
Yep.
business, I think
Yes.
globally. So,
Yep.
Hugh, always an absolute pleasure. As I said, I could sit here and just
Likewise.
listen to these all day. I
Thank
really
you.
appreciate your time. I know how busy you are, so thank you.
My
And
pleasure.
I really look forward.
I wish you everything, and hope you learn some good things out of the book to
Yeah,
strategies to help you grow your business.
absolutely. So there it
Excellent.
is. Oh, trying to get it in there, but
There you got it. You got it.
yeah, amazing, and thoroughly enjoyed it. I've read the book 3 times now, but this is like actionable insights, though. It's a textbook more than just a book, right? So
You're right. But there are a lot of, I think what I like about it as well is there are a lot of usable points or strategies in there. It's not something that's really theoretical. It's something that's, wow, I can go use that tomorrow.
yeah.
So that's great.
So you're right, and we should make sure we say it's hard to sort of show there, but Business' War, JT Fox, Hugh Hilton, get on and buy it now because it's the best book in business that's out there. So Hugh, pleasure. Thank you so much. Really appreciate your time.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Share it with others who are passionate about healthcare and business. Stay tuned for more incredible stories and insights in our next episode. Until then, keep pushing boundaries. Thanks for tuning in to the Australian Business Show. If you found value in today's episode, be sure to rate and review us on your favourite podcast platform. Hit that subscribe button and stay connected with us for more groundbreaking stories, actionable insights, and game-changing tactics designed to fuel your business growth.